In the summer of the second year of the Chunxi period, 1175, Liu Pokong and Tong Lai came from Tongyang to my Hanchuan study and stayed over for 10 days. Together we read the works of masters Chou Tun-yi, Chonghao, Cheng-yi, and Chongsai, and lamented over the fact that their doctrines are as extensive and broad as a sea without shores. Fearing that a beginner may not know where to start, we have selected passages concerned with fundamentals and closely related to daily application to constitute this volume, making a total of 622 items divided into 14 chapters. I believe that the essentials of the student's search for the beginnings of things exerting effort, conducting himself, and managing others, as well as the gist of understanding the heterodox schools and observing the sages and worthies can be seen in rough outline. Thus, if a young man in an isolated village who has the will to learn, but no enlightened teacher or good friend to guide him, obtains this volume, and explores and broods over its material in his own mind, he will be able to find the gate to enter. He can then read the complete works of the four gentlemen, deeply sift their meanings, and repeatedly recite their words, and absorb them at leisure, so as to achieve an extensive learning and return to the simple truth. He can then acquire all the beauties of the ancestral temple and all the richness of the governmental offices. Someone may shrink from effort and be contented with the simple and convenient, thinking that all he needs is to be found here. But this is not the purpose of the present anthology. Respectfully, Jushi of Xi'an, 5th day of the 5th month. Chou Tun-yi said, "The ultimate of non-being, Wu Qi, and also the great ultimate, Tai Chi. The operations of heaven have neither sound nor smell, and yet this ultimate of non-being is really the axis of creation and the foundation of things of all kinds, ultimate being. Therefore, the ultimate of non-being, and also the great ultimate. It does not mean that outside of the great ultimate there is an ultimate of non-being. The great ultimate through movement generates yang. When its activity reaches its limit, it becomes tranquil. Through tranquility, the great ultimate generates yin. When tranquility reaches its limit, activity begins again. So movement and tranquility alternate and become the root of each other, giving rise to the distinction of yin and yang. And the two modes are thus established. By the transformation of yang and its union with yin, the 5 agents of water, fire, wood, metal, and earth arise. When these 5 material forces are distributed in harmonious order, the 4 seasons run their course. The 5 agents constitute one system of yin and yang, and yin and yang constitute one great ultimate. The great ultimate is fundamentally the ultimate of non-being. The 5 agents arise, each with its specific nature. The 5 agents differ in substance, and the 4 seasons differ in material force, but none of them can be outside yin or yang. Yin and yang differ in position, and activity and tranquility differ in time, but none of them can be outside the great ultimate. The great ultimate itself is originally without either sound or smell. It is so because the original substance of its nature makes it so. Is there anything in the universe without nature? As the five agents arise, each follows its own physical nature and is different in its endowment. Hence, each has its specific nature. When the reality of the ultimate of non-being and the essence of yin, yang, and the five agents come into mysterious union, integration ensues. Tian, heaven, constitutes the male element, and Kun, earth, constitutes the female element. The interaction of these two material forces engenders and transforms the myriad things. The myriad things produce and reproduce, resulting in an unending transformation. It is man alone who receives the material forces in their highest excellence, and therefore he is most intelligent. His physical form appears, and his spirit develops consciousness. The five moral principles of his nature are aroused by and react to the external world and engage in activity. Good and evil are distinguished, and human affairs take place. The sage settles these affairs by the principles of the mean, correctness, humanity, and righteousness. For the way of the sage is none other than these four. Regarding tranquility as fundamental, having no desire, there will therefore be tranquility. Thus he establishes himself as the ultimate standard for man. Hence the character of the sage is identical with that of heaven and earth. His brilliancy is identical with that of the sun and moon. His order is identical with that of the four seasons, and his good and evil fortunes are identical with those of spiritual beings. The superior man cultivates these moral qualities and enjoys good fortune, whereas the inferior man violates them and suffers evil fortune. This is to say that the sage completely possesses the characters of activity and tranquility, but always considers tranquility as the basis. Man is born with the endowment of the excellent forces of yin, yang, and the five agents, and the sage is born with the most excellent. Therefore his action is in accord with the mean, his handling of things is correct. Whatever issues from him is characterized by humanity, and his decisions are guided by righteousness. Whether active or tranquil, he always preserves the way of the great ultimate completely. In this way, anyone who is overcome by passion because he has been aroused by selfish desires or has in his mind a conflict between benefit and harm can settle himself. But tranquility means returning to sincerity and true nature. Unless one's mind is tranquil by being absolutely quiet and without desire, how can one handle changing events and become one with activities of the world? Therefore the sage abides by the mean, correctness, humanity, and righteousness. His activity and tranquility are all pervasive, but in his activity, tranquility is always fundamental. This is why he can occupy the central position, and neither heaven, earth, the sun and moon, the four seasons, nor the spiritual beings can oppose him. Therefore it is said that yin and yang are established as the way of heaven, the weak and the strong as the way of earth, and humanity and righteousness as the way of man. It is also said that if we investigate the cycle of things, we shall understand the concepts of life and death. Great is the book of changes, herein lies its excellence. Sincerity engages in no activity, but is the subtle, incipient, activating force giving rise to good and evil. This book consists of original passages and then comments. This is Jushi commenting from the original passage of Cheng-Yi or Cheng-Hao or whoever. Sincerity means concrete principle, and engaging in no activity means being absolutely quiet. Concrete principle involves both tranquility and activity, but in its original substance it takes no action. Incipient force means activity at the subtle stage. With activity, good and evil take shape. With sincerity, there is no activity, and there is only goodness. With activity, there will be both good and evil. The virtue of loving is called humanity. That of doing what is proper is called righteousness. That of putting things in order is called propriety. That of penetration is called wisdom, and that of abiding by one's commitments is called faithfulness. One who is in accord with his nature and acts with ease is a sage. One who returns to his nature and adheres to it is a worthy. And one whose subtle emanation cannot be seen and whose goodness is abundant and all-pervasive without limit is a man of the spirit. Spirit is a character of the sage, mysterious and unfathomable. It does not mean that outside of the sage there is a being called spirit. Changyi said, "The state before the feelings of pleasure, anger, sorrow, and joy are aroused is called equilibrium. By equilibrium is meant the state of absolute quiet. Therefore it is called the great foundation of the world. The state when these feelings are aroused and each and all attain due measure and degree is called harmony. By harmony is meant that the state of absolute quiet, when acted on, immediately penetrates all things. Therefore it is called the universal path." The mind is one. Sometimes it is spoken of in terms of its substance. This is the state of absolute quiet. Sometimes it is spoken of in terms of its function. This is that which, when acted on, immediately penetrates all things. It depends on one's point of view. Jushi. Substance and the state of absolute quiet refer to man's nature, whereas function, being acted on and penetrating all things, refer to feelings. Tian means heaven. Tian is the physical body of Tian, whereas Tian is the nature and feelings of heaven nature. Tian means strength. What is strong and is unceasing in its activity is called Tian. Spoken of as one, heaven is the way, Tao. This is the meaning in the saying, heaven will not be in opposition. Spoken of in its different aspects, it is called heaven with respect to its physical body, the Lord with respect to its being the master, negative and positive spiritual forces with respect to its operation, spirit with respect to its wonderful functioning, and Tian with respect to its nature and feelings. Spoken of as one, heaven is the way. This is the meaning in the saying, heaven will not be in operation. I dare say this statement is incorrect. Heaven in the quotation merely means the heaven up there. Someone asked, "Who is the master?" Jushi answered, "Heaven itself. Heaven is an absolutely strong thing, yang, and therefore rotates without stop. There must be a master before it can do so. One must see such a thing for himself. It is not something that can be fully explained in words." Negative and positive spiritual forces follow a certain order and are manifested in observable facts. Spirit is suddenly this way and suddenly that way, without any trace or order. Essentially, it is not separate from spiritual forces except that it is not manifested in observable facts. Operation includes both the refined and the coarse. It refers to creation. Wonderful functioning refers to the refined. Its mystery is unfathomable. Origination in the four qualities is comparable to humanity among the five constant virtues. Spoken of separately, it is one of the several, but spoken of collectively, it embraces all the four. Origination means that things begin to grow. Only then will they develop, and only after they have developed can they be completed. Advantage means their accomplishment, but this represents only 60 or 70% of their completion. They are not 100% complete until they remain firm. Here we are speaking of them separately. All principles of development, etc., are already involved in growth. Here we are speaking of them collectively. The feeling of commiseration is the beginning of humanity. The feeling of shame and dislike, the beginning of righteousness. The feeling of deference and compliance, the beginning of propriety. And the feeling of right and wrong, the beginning of wisdom. Without commiseration, there will not be the rest. The sense of shame and dislike is humanity expressed in shame and dislike. The sense of deference and compliance is humanity expressed in deference and compliance. And the sense of right and wrong is humanity expressed in approval and disapproval. Destiny is what is endowed by heaven, and the nature is what things have received. Principle is one. It is called destiny in terms of what heaven has imparted to the myriad things, and it is called nature in terms of what they have received from heaven. Actually, the different names express different points of view, that is all. Positive and negative spiritual forces are traces of creation. When asked about positive and negative spiritual forces as traces of creation, Jushi said, "Wind, rain, frost, dew, and the change of the 4 seasons." When asked for an explanation, he said, "These are traces that can be observed." Further question, "We look and cannot see them. We listen and cannot hear them. Why?" Answer, "If you say they are there, they are not. But if you say they are not there, they are. And the growth and maturity of things are not positive and negative forces at work. The sun, the moon, stars, planets, wind, and thunder are all traces of creation. There is only one and the same material force in the universe. What is to come is positive spiritual force, and what has gone is negative spiritual force. This refers to the operation of the universe. The traces are those of activity and tranquility, coming and going, condensation and dispersion, and rising and falling. In the hexagram poa strip, all the yang elements are completely stripped off except the topmost undivided line in which the yang element remains. It is comparable to a large fruit that has not been eaten. According to principle, it will be reborn. If the topmost undivided line also changes, then the whole hexagram will become purely yin. But according to principle, yang cannot be exhausted. While changes take place above, growth takes place below. There is not a moment in between. The sage clarifies this principle to show that the way of both yang and the superior man cannot be destroyed. Someone says, "When the stripping is completed, there will be purely kun, earth. How can there be any more yang?" I answer, when hexagrams are matched with the months, the kun corresponds to the 10th month. In terms of the ebb and flow of material force, while yang is being stripped to form the hexagram kun, at the same time it comes to form the hexagram fu, to return. Yang has never been exhausted. As it is about to be exhausted on top in the hexagram po, it grows at the bottom in the hexagram fu. Therefore, the 10th month is called the month of yang, for fear that people might think it contains no yang. The same principle is true of the month of yin. Only the sage did not say so. The ebb and flow of yin and yang continue in cycles without stop. According to principle, they never get exhausted. As soon as yang changes and is about to be exhausted above, it grows below without a moment in between. The way of the superior man is the same as the way of yang. They cannot be destroyed. Tung Chung Shu says, the 10th month is purely yin. For fear that people might think it contains no yang, it is called the month of yang. The 4th month is purely yang. For fear that people might think it contains no yin, it is therefore called the month of yin. From this it can be seen that the 4th month has been called the month of yin. It is simply because he bases assertion on the Arya, correct means of terms, and the commentary on the Book of Changes that Master Chung said the sage did not say so. When one yang element returns at the bottom, it shows that the mind of heaven and earth is to produce things. Former scholars have all contended that the mind of heaven and earth is seen in tranquility. They did not know that the mind of heaven and earth is seen in the beginning of activity. How can those ignorant of the way know this? To return is to go back to the source. The source is the mind of heaven and earth. This source is quiet and absolute non-being. Therefore, when activity ceases on earth, the mind of heaven and earth can be seen. The mind of heaven and earth is always present. Only because it is tranquil, people do not see it. The character of heaven and earth is to produce and reproduce. Origination, flourishing, advantage, and firmness are all indications of the mind of heaven and earth. When it is tranquil and has returned to its original state, it exists as substance before it is manifested. When it is active and penetrates everything, it exists as function after it has manifested itself. When one yang element returns, its growth is very subtle and, of course, seems to be tranquil, but it is the incipient state of activity. Its force increases every day, and all things depend on it for their beginning. And this we can see when the mandate of heaven begins to operate and the process of creation and development starts. The mind of heaven and earth is to produce and reproduce without cease. Although the substance of this mind, tranquil and unmanifested, is everywhere, it is not revealed. Therefore, Master Chung considers the beginning activity as the mind of heaven and earth. He mentions function to include substance. Fundamentally, the mind of heaven and earth makes no distinction between activity and tranquility. Furthermore, activity may be based on tranquility after all. However, in the state of tranquility, the material force of yang is dormant and there is no clue to the mind of the universe. And when the force of yang grows and is strong and all things flourish, the mind is not concentrated and cannot be seen. Therefore, it can be seen only when the force is about to terminate and yet continues, and when tranquility reaches its limit and activity begins. Humanity is universal impartiality. It is the foundation of goodness. The man of humanity regards heaven and earth and all things as one body. Therefore, humanity is called universal impartiality. The four beginnings and all goodness are led and controlled by humanity. Therefore, it is called the foundation of goodness. Wherever there is influence, there is necessarily response. All actions are influences. As there is influence, there is necessarily response. The response becomes influence, and the influence becomes response again, and therefore there will be no end. Let those who know the way understand this principle of influence and response in silence. Everything in the universe is governed by the principle of influence and response, whether universal creation or human affairs. Take rain and shine, for instance. Rain does not mean simply raining. It has the influence to bring about shine. Shine does not mean simply shining. It is a response and has the influence to bring about rain. Thus, as there is influence, there is always response, and the response in turn becomes influence. The changes of winter and summer, and day and night, all follow this principle. One thing causes another. This is the process of influence and response. The second thing causes a third. The second thing is influence, while the third is response. According to the principle of the world, a thing will begin again when it ends, and can therefore last forever without limit. Being long-lasting does not mean being in a fixed and definite state. Being fixed and definite, a thing cannot last long. The way to be constant is to change according to circumstances. Unless one knows the way, how can he understand the constant and lasting way of the universe and the constant and lasting principle of the world? Knowing the way means to know that the way is naturally like this. The constant and lasting way of the universe refers to creation and transformation, such as morning and evening, and summer and winter, while the constant and lasting principle of the world refers to human affairs, such as serving or not serving in the government, speaking or keeping silent. To last long is not to be fixed. Therefore, morning necessarily leads to evening, and evening leads back to morning. In the case of man, he drinks hot soup in the winter, but cold water in the summer. When it is time to accept office, he accepts office, and when it is time to retire, he retires. If today one agrees with his superior on principles, he follows his superior. If tomorrow he disagrees, he begs leave. Only when one changes according to the situation can he last long. Someone asked, if a thing has already changed, how can it be called long-lasting? Jushi answered, to go in and out is to be permanent. The rotation of the 4 seasons makes heaven and earth long-lasting. If there is only cold without heat, or heat without cold, how can they be long-lasting? Man's nature is originally good. Why is it that some people cannot change? I answer, in terms of their nature, all men are good. In terms of their physical nature, there are the most stupid who do not change. The most stupid are of 2 kinds, those who do violence to their own nature, and those who throw themselves away. If one manages himself with goodness, he can always change. Even the most beclouded and most stupid can gradually polish themselves and advance. Only those who do violence to their own nature refuse to change because they do not believe in it, and only those who throw themselves away cut themselves off because they do not want to do anything. Even if a sage should live among them, he cannot influence them so they could enter into goodness. They are what Choni called the most stupid. Those who do violence to their nature destroy themselves. They think they cannot abide by humanity and practice righteousness. They say they cannot do these things, cut themselves off, and refuse to act. Throwing oneself away means that because one's will is weak and his interest inferior, he willingly cuts himself off, thinking that he cannot abide by humanity or practice righteousness. Although he is told about the excellence of humanity and righteousness, he believes he cannot abide by and practice them. You cannot do anything with such people. Those who do violence to their nature do so because of their strength, whereas those who throw themselves away do so because of their weakness. Refusing to do means that the most stupid do not believe in the principle that people can change, and not wanting to do means that they know that in principle people can change, but that they themselves cannot do so. However, people in the world who do violence to their nature or throw themselves away are not all necessarily beclouded or stupid. In most cases, they are strong and violent, with superior ability and strength, like Shin of the Shang dynasty. The sage called such people most stupid because they cut themselves off from goodness. In the final analysis, they are truly stupid. Since they are the most stupid, how can they make any change on the surface? I answer, although in their hearts they cut themselves off from the principle of goodness, they are afraid of punishment and want to minimize their offense. In this they are similar to others. Precisely because they are similar to others, we know that their failure is not due to the fault of their nature. Habits become one's second nature, causing one to get further and further from his nature. Thus, in principle, some people do not change, but human nature is originally good. Even the most wicked person, if he can be good for one day, becomes a good man for that day. Is it possible that one cannot change? Cheng-Yi's theory should be followed. Confucius said that some people definitely do not change. They do not do so because of their physical nature. How can we say that they can change? They are called the most stupid, and the reason why they have become most stupid is because of their physical nature. Confucius' theory is perfect, whereas Cheng-Yi's doctrine is only 70% complete. Someone asked, then Yu Chu collected commentaries on the Analects. You said that among people whose physical natures are nearly alike, there are some who definitely cannot change, but at the same time you quoted Master Cheng's theory that all people can change. There seems to be a contradiction. Jushi answered, as Confucius said, there are people who cannot change. For example, Yao and Shun cannot be changed into Che and Chou, nor can Che and Chou be changed into Yao or Shun. Confucius merely said this much. Cheng-Yi, however, extended Confucius' theory. We must realize that while they differ in some respects, the fact remains that they agree in other respects. That which is inherent in things is principle. That by which things are managed is moral principles. All things have their principle, for principle is not outside things or affairs. That by which things are managed is moral principles. I means to be proper. It means to handle a thing in the way according to the principle of right and wrong. Take this table. According to principle, it can hold things. When I use it accordingly, that is I, or E. Activity and tranquility have no beginning, and yin and yang have no starting point. Unless one knows the way, how can he understand this? Activity and tranquility push each other, and yin and yang change subtly. There is no interruption. If there is interruption, there will be a beginning or a starting point. Since there is no interruption, it is said that there is neither a beginning nor a starting point. This means that yang, which is activity, and yin, which is tranquility, operate in a cycle without end and have no starting point that can be found. No beginning means a cycle, while no starting point means a continuous operation. Humanity is the correct principle of the world. When the correct principle is lost, there will be no order and consequently no harmony. This explains the Analects 3:3, which says, if a man is not humane, what has he to do with ceremonies? If a man is not humane, what has he to do with music? The loss of the correct principle refers to the mind, while the absence of order and harmony refers to human affairs. This is well said, except that the idea is too general. It should have been said that humanity is the perfect virtue of the original mind, and consequently there is the principle of nature in it, Tianli. If the principle of nature is absent, human desires will run wild. How can there be any order or any resultant harmony? Chung Hao said, "There is no creature in the world that does not possess sufficient principle. I have always thought that rulers and ministers, fathers and sons, brothers and husbands and wives have somewhat failed to fulfill their functions. Loyalty and faithfulness are the ways by which one advances his virtue. Making uninterrupted effort all day means that the superior man should face the Lord in heaven all day. For the operations of heaven have neither sound nor smell. Their substance is called change, their principle the way, and their function spirit. What heaven imparts to man is called the nature. To follow the law of our nature is called the way. Cultivation according to the way is called education." Mencius went further and expounded the doctrine of the strong moving power. Nothing more can be said. Man is born with the correct and great force of the universe, which is originally strong and moving. This passage says that the material force of heaven and man is one, and therefore man can face the Lord in heaven all day. Therefore it is said, spiritual beings seem to be above and to be on the left and the right. No matter how many important things there may be, they can be covered by the saying, "Such is the impossibility of hiding the real." What penetrates the higher level and what penetrates the lower level are nothing but this realness. The real, or sincerity, Chung, is concrete principle, that is, the substance of loyalty and faithfulness. This concrete principle penetrates both heaven and man. Therefore the superior man advances his virtue with loyalty and faithfulness and faces the Lord in heaven all day. What exists before physical form and is therefore without it constitutes the way. What exists after physical form and is therefore with it constitutes concrete things. Nevertheless, though we speak in this way, concrete things are the way, and the way is concrete things. So long as the way obtains, it does not matter whether it is present or future, or whether it is the self or others. Although the operations of heaven have neither sound nor smell, the substance of their opening and closing, and transfigurations and transformations is called change. The principle that makes these operations and closings, and transfigurations and transformations possible is the way. Their manifest and obvious functioning is called spirit. All these concern heaven. As to what is imparted to men, it is called the nature. To follow the law of our nature is called the way, and to cultivate ourselves according to the way is called education. All these concern man. After such a penetrating discussion on both heaven above and man below, there is nothing more to be said. The fact that spiritual beings seem to be above and on the left and the right is the obvious indication or manifestation of this principle. Whether things are important or not, they cannot escape from this principle. Heaven, earth, and spiritual beings above cannot get away from it, and all the 10,000 things below cannot get outside of it. Therefore it is said that what penetrates the higher level and what penetrates the lower level is nothing but this. It is not that outside of physical forms and concrete things there is another principle. Time extending to the entire past and present, and the 10,000 things and affairs are nothing but this. Books on medicine describe paralysis of the four limbs as absence of humanity. This is an excellent description. The man of humanity regards heaven and earth and all things as one body. To him there is nothing that is not himself. Since he has recognized all things as himself, can there be any limit to his humanity? If things are not parts of the self, naturally they have nothing to do with it. As in the case of paralysis of the four limbs, the vital force no longer penetrates them, and therefore they are no longer parts of the self. Therefore, to be charitable and to assist all things is the function of a sage. It is most difficult to describe humanity. Hence, Confucius merely said that the man of humanity It is most difficult to describe humanity. Hence, Confucius merely said that the man of humanity, wishing to establish his own character, also establishes the character of others, and wishing to be prominent himself, also helps others to be prominent. To be able to judge of others by what is in ourselves may be called the method of realizing humanity. The hope was that by looking at it this way we might get at the substance of humanity. What is inborn is called nature. Nature is the same as material force, and material force is the same as nature. They are both inborn. This section is a difficult one. We must read it carefully. Cheng-Yi's explanation is not entirely satisfactory. What is inborn is called the nature. That means our nature comes from birth, is mixed with physical nature with which we are endowed, and is therefore not the nature which is identical with principle. Past scholars who said that human nature is evil, or that it is good, or that it is both good and evil, did not understand human nature. Cheng-Yi was the first to say that nature is identical with principle. This is something no one had said before. According to principle, there are both good and evil in the material force with which man is endowed at birth. However, man is not born with these two opposing elements in his nature to start with. Due to the material force with which men are endowed, some become good from childhood and others become evil, such as Ho Chi, who had an outstanding appearance at birth, and Ziyue Qiao, of whom it was known at birth that he would destroy his own clan. Man's nature is of course good, but it cannot be said that evil is not his nature, for what is inborn is called nature. By nature man is tranquil at birth. The state preceding this cannot be discussed. As soon as we talk about human nature, we already go beyond it. Actually, in our discussion of nature, we only talk about the idea expressed as what issues from the way is good. This is the case when Mencius speaks of the original goodness of human nature. The fact that whatever issues from the way is good may be compared to the fact that water always flows downward. Water as such is the same in all cases. Some water flows onward to the sea without becoming dirty. What human effort is needed here? Some flows only a short distance before growing turbid. Some travels a long distance before growing turbid. Some becomes extremely turbid, some only slightly so. Although water differs in being clean or turbid, we cannot say that the turbid water, evil, ceases to be water, nature. Thus being the case, man must make an increasing effort at purification. With diligent and vigorous effort, water will become clear quickly. With slow and lazy effort, water will become clear slowly. When it is clear, it is then the original water. Not that clear water has been substituted for turbid water, nor that turbid water has been taken out and left in a corner. The original goodness of human nature is like the original clearness of water. Therefore, it is not true that two distinct and opposing elements of good and evil exist in human nature and that each of them issues from it. This principle is the mandate of heaven. For anyone to obey and follow it is the way. For anyone to follow it and cultivate it so that everyone attains his function corresponding to his nature is education. From the mandate of heaven to education, one can neither augment nor diminish this function. Such is the case of Shun, who possessed his empire as if it were nothing to him. Observe the disposition of all living things within heaven and earth. This was the view of Chou Mao Shu. In the creative process, all things grow and flourish. The process is all prevalent, and the principle is orderly and penetrates everything. When one sees this, one's originally good mind grows abundantly. The most impressive aspect of things is their spirit of life. This is what is meant by origination being the chief quality of goodness. This is humanity. The spirit of life begins with origination, and origination is humanity. In the growth of all things and in the operation of the mandate of heaven, from beginning to end, principle is always present. However, it is particularly easy to see when things begin to grow and its purity has not been diffused. Origination, flourishing, advantage, and firmness are all good, but origination is the chief quality of goodness, and out of which flourishing, advantage, and firmness have come. Similarly, humanity, righteousness, propriety, and wisdom are all good, but humanity is the first of all virtues. Righteousness, propriety, and wisdom all come out of it. What fills the whole body is the feeling of commiseration. The feeling of commiseration pervades the whole body, therefore the body feels it whenever there is any pain or itch. From this we can see that as heaven, earth, and the 10,000 things form one body, the feeling of commiseration is found everywhere. The mind that combines heaven, earth, and all things as one body fills the whole body. The feeling of commiseration pervades the whole body. It can be aroused anywhere. For example, we have a feeling of commiseration when we see a child about to fall into a well. When we see an ant in similar danger, do we have the same feeling? Question: does what fills the whole body is the feeling of commiseration mean merely not to understand it? Master Chung also said, the mind must remain in the body. Does that mean merely not to let the mind get lost? Is Chuangzi body a colloquial Zen expression? Answer: Chuangzi merely means the body. It is a colloquialism, but not a Zen expression. The feeling of commiseration filling the body merely means that from the beginning it pervades the whole body. No idea of nourishment is involved. What you said about the second saying is correct. According to the principle of heaven and earth and all things, nothing exists in isolation, but everything necessarily has its opposite. All this is naturally so, and is not arranged or manipulated. I often think of this at midnight, and I feel as happy as if I were dancing with my hands and feet. Someone asked, according to the principle of heaven and earth, nothing exists in isolation, but everything necessarily has its opposite. As there is activity, there is necessarily tranquility. As there is yin, there is necessarily yang, and so on, including expansion and contraction, rising and falling, and flourishing and decline. Has this been so from the beginning? Jushi answered, it is so from the beginning. Someone asked, opposition concerns things. How can principle have opposition? Jushi answered, the opposition between the high and the low, that between the large and the small, and that between the clear and the turbid are examples. These refer to things. What do you say? Jushi said, as there is the high, there is the low, and as there is the large, there is the small. This is true because of principle. In the things produced by heaven, there cannot be yin alone. There must also be yang. And there cannot be yang alone. There must also be yin. There must be opposition. In this opposition, it is not principle that opposes, but according to principle, there should be opposition like this. The mean is the great foundation of the universe. It is the correct principle of all under heaven, which is unalterable, central, and straight. Any deviation from it is wrong. Only when one cultivates it with seriousness, Qing, without fail, can one fully preserve it. Chung Yi said, where there is impartiality, there is unity, and where there is partiality, there is multiplicity. If people's minds are as different as their faces are, it is solely due to partiality. People all agree on the correctness of moral principles. Therefore, when there is impartiality, there is unity. When impartiality prevails, all things form one body, but when partiality or selfishness prevails, the self and the other become multiplicities. That is, they become different, and there will be obstacles between them. Among things, some are fundamental and others are secondary, but the fundamental and the secondary should not be distinguished as two different things. To sprinkle and sweep the ground and to answer questions are things to be done, but there must be a reason why they should be done. To order one's mind and cultivate one's person are fundamental, and to sprinkle and sweep the ground and to answer questions are secondary. All these are things to be done, but there must be the principle according to which they should be done. Principle is neither refined nor coarse, and neither fundamental nor secondary. It is the one thread that penetrates all. Question. Things to be done are human affairs, whereas the reason things should be done is a matter of the principle of nature. Is that correct? Answer. Generally correct. Think over the matter more thoroughly. Though he might have benefited the whole world by plucking out a single hair, Yangtze, 440 to 360 BC, would not have done it. But if by rubbing his whole body smooth from head to foot he could have benefited the world, Moses, 468 376 BC, would have done it. Neither attained the mean. As to Zemo, who wanted to hold the mean between the two, how could he do so? If one understands principle, there is naturally the mean in each and every thing. It does not require anyone's manipulation. If it is manipulated, it ceases to be the mean. This is to say that the mean in things comes naturally out of the principle of nature, and is not something that human effort can manipulate, for the mean has no definite form, depending on whether a thing is big or small, and important or unimportant. When it is right to do it, then to do it is the mean, and when it is right not to do it, then not to do it is the mean. Zimwa hesitated between the two. His selfishness was not as sharp as that of Yangtze, and his universal love was not as extreme as that of Moses. He held on to the middle. He did not know what the mean was. What is meant by the mean according to the circumstance? Answer. The word chung is most difficult to understand. It must be understood silently and apprehended in one's mind. Take the living room. Its center is the chung, but in the whole house the chung is not the center of the living room, but is the central hall. In the whole country, the chung is not the hall, but is the center of the country. Other cases can be inferred analogically. For instance, at the time of Yu, 2183 to 2175 BC, and Hocher, it was in accord with the mean that they passed their own doors 3 times without entering them, but it would not have been in accord with the mean to dwell in a humble alley. At the time of Inza, 521 to 490 BC, it was in accord with the mean that he dwelt in a humble alley, but it would not have been in accord with the mean for him to pass his door 3 times without entering it. Absence of falsehood is called sincerity. Not to deceive is not as good. Li Pangshi said that not to deceive is called sincerity. He therefore regards the absence of deception as sincerity. Shu Cheng Che regards ceaselessness as sincerity. The doctrine of the mean says absolute sincerity is ceaseless, but does not explain sincerity in terms of ceaselessness. Someone asked the teacher about this. Thereupon the teacher uttered these words. Absence of falsehood is natural sincerity, whereas not to deceive is an effort. Absence of falsehood means that one has no falsehood in himself, therefore there is sincerity. Not to deceive implies that one has an object, therefore it is not as good. Empty and tranquil, and without any sign, and yet all things are luxuriantly present. The state before there is any response to it is not an earlier one, and the state after there has been response to it is not a latter one. It is like a tree 100 feet high. From the root to the branches and leaves there is one thread running through all. We should not say that the state described above, which has neither form nor sign, depends on man to manipulate it when the occasion requires, in order to pull it into a track. Tracks are, after all, tracks. Actually, there is only one track. Before there is the relationship between the ruler and the minister, there is the principle of that relationship. Before there is the relationship between the father and the son, there is the principle. It is not that Originally, there is no such principle, and that only after there are such relationships there is principle put into them. Before the existence of things and affairs, their principles are already present. All our handlings of affairs and responses to things, however momentary, are manifestations of this principle. A track is a path on which one should travel. Such things as deep love on the part of the father and filial piety on the part of the son are but one track. They all come from one source. As we look at something immediate to us, our own body, we can see that all principles are present in it. The principle of expansion and contraction and of coming and going can be seen in our breathing. Expansion and contraction and coming and going are nothing but principle. It is not necessary to take the breath that has already contracted and reconvert it to the breath that is about to expand. The principle of production and reproduction is naturally ceaseless. It is said in the commentary on the Fu hexagram, in 7 days it will return. Fundamentally, there is no interruption. When yang reaches its limit, it will return and grow again. When a thing reaches its limit in one direction, it will turn back the other direction. It is because of its principle that it has to do so. As there is life, there must be death, and as there is the beginning, there must be the end. Someone asked, expansion and contraction and coming and going are matters of the material force. Why did Master Chung say they are nothing but principle? Jushi answered, it is according to principle that the material force has to expand or contract, and to come or to go. In breathing, we can see the meaning of expansion and contraction, and of coming and going. In terms of principle, expansion and contraction and coming and going are naturally unceasing. In terms of material force, since the contracted breath is not used to make expanding breath, the theory is different from the Buddhist doctrine of transmigration. In this section, principle and material force must be considered as one. In his commentary, Ye Tsai distinguished them, but that was not the original intention of Master Chung. Take breathing as an illustration of expansion and contraction. To exhale is to expand, and to inhale is to contract. To breathe in a quantity of air and keep it in the lungs is to contract, and to exhale a quantity of air and spread it outside is to expand. When Ye Tsai equates going as contraction and coming as expansion, he is following the Book of Changes, in which the process of going up means to go or to contract, while the process of going down means to come or to expand. This is different from the coming and going in breathing. However, the principle is the same. Master Ming Tao said, within heaven and earth there is only the process of action and response. What else is there? In the changes and transformations of yin and yang, the growth and maturity of things, the interaction of sincerity and insincerity, and the beginning and ending of events, one is the influence and the other the response, succeeding each other in a cycle. This is why they never stop. When asked about humanity, Master Chungi said, it is up to you gentlemen to think for yourselves and personally realize what humanity is, because Mencius said, the feeling of commiseration is what we call humanity. Later scholars have therefore considered love to be humanity, but love is feeling, whereas humanity is the nature. How can love be taken exclusively as humanity? Mencius said that the feeling of commiseration is the beginning of humanity. Since it is called the beginning of humanity, it should not be called humanity itself. It is wrong for Hanyu 768-824 to say universal love is humanity. A man of humanity of course loves universally, but one may not therefore regard universal love as humanity. Question. What is the difference between humanity and the mind? Answer. The mind is comparable to seeds of grain. The nature of growth is humanity. When it develops on contact with the material force of yang, that is feeling. Because Mencius said that humanity is man's mind or heart, students have taken the mind to mean humanity, without realizing that humanity and the heart are different. Actually, the heart is the physical embodiment of principle. It is made of blood and vital force. It is comparable to seeds, which are made of the essence of the grain, but they contain in them the principle of growth. Because they have the nature to grow, seeds sprout after they have been sown, but it is wrong to regard seeds as the nature to grow. Similarly, because the human heart possesses the nature to grow, it is naturally commiserative and loving, but it is wrong to regard the heart as the nature to grow. For the nature to grow is humanity. Because humanity is present in the heart, it becomes active as soon as it is affected, just as seeds sprout as soon as they are affected by the material force of yang. This is feeling. E. Righteousness denotes what is proper and correct. V. Propriety, ceremonies, denotes distinction. Zhi. Wisdom denotes knowledge. What does Ren denote? Scholars have said that it denotes consciousness or the distinguishing characteristic of man. They are all wrong. One should combine Confucius's and Mencius's teachings on Ren and thoroughly search for its general meaning. It will not be too late if one finds it in 2 or 3 years. The nature is the same as principle, traced to its source. None of the principles in the world is not good. Before they are aroused, have pleasure, anger, sorrow, and joy ever been found to be not good? As they are aroused and attain due measure and degree, they are good, no matter in what connection. When they are aroused and do not attain due measure or degree, then they are not good. Therefore, whenever we speak of good and evil, good always precedes evil. Whenever we speak of good and evil fortune, good fortune always precedes evil fortune. And whenever we speak of right and wrong, right always precedes wrong. In the Yi Chuan, it is said, completion precedes destruction. Destruction does not precede construction. Gain precedes loss. Without gain, how can there be loss? The nature is the same as principle. None since Confucius and Mencius has ever had this insight. None from ancient times on has ever made such a bold statement. Question. Are there good and evil in the mind? Answer. What is received by man and things from heaven is called destiny. What is inherent in things is called principle. What is endowed in man is called nature. And as the master of the body, it is called mind. In reality, they are all one. The mind is originally good, as it is aroused and expresses itself in thoughts and ideas. There is good and evil. When the mind has been aroused, it should be described in terms of feelings and not as the mind in itself. For instance, water is water, but as it flows and branches off, some to the east and some to the west, it is called streams and branches. I fear that there is something questionable about this paragraph. Every human activity is an act of the mind, even self-abandonment, moral deflection, depravity, and wild license are activities of the mind. Good and evil are similar to turning one's palm. Turning away from the good side is evil. Not to hold the hand steady is also evil. For example, if when one should have the feeling of commiseration, he has the feeling of shame and dislike, this is incorrect. Nature comes from heaven, whereas capacity comes from material force. When material force is clear, capacity is clear. When material force is turbid, capacity is turbid. Capacity may be good or evil, but the nature is always good. Nature is based on principle, and principle is always good. Capacity is based on material force. The endowment of material force is unequal, and is therefore in some cases good and in other cases evil. Master Chung's interpretation of psi as capacity is slightly different from the meaning in the Book of Mencius. Mencius refers to what comes from one's original nature and therefore regards psi as always good, whereas Master Chung refers to what comes from physical nature, therefore one's capacity may be strong or weak, and enlightened or beclouded. The nature is naturally self-sufficient. Faithfulness merely means to have this self-sufficiency. Therefore, the four beginnings do not include faithfulness. If the feeling of commiseration or the feeling of shame and dislike, for example, is genuine, that is faithfulness. Spoken of separately, humanity, righteousness, propriety, and wisdom are all naturally self-sufficient. Truly to have them means faithfulness. Thus, faithfulness occupies no fixed position. Outside these four virtues, there is not another one called faithfulness. The mind is the principle of production. As there is the mind, a body must be provided for it so it can produce. The feeling of commiseration is the principle of production in man. The mind of heaven and earth to produce things is Ren. In man's endowment, he receives this mind from heaven and earth, and thus he can produce. Therefore, man's feeling of commiseration is also a principle of production. Master Chongsai said, as the great vacuity, material force is extensive and vague, yet it ascends and descends and moves in all ways without ever ceasing. Here lies the subtle, incipient activation of reality and unreality, of motion and rest, and the beginning of yin and yang, as well as the elements of strength and weakness. Yang that is clear ascends upward, whereas yin that is turbid sinks downward. As a result of their contact and influence and of their integration and disintegration, winds and rains, snow and frost come into being, whether it be the countless variety of things and their changing configurations, or the mountains and rivers and their fixed forms, the dregs of wine or the ashes of fire. There is nothing from which something cannot be learned. Material force moves and flows in all directions and in all manners. Its two elements unite and give rise to the concrete. Thus, the multiplicity of things and human beings is produced. In their ceaseless successions, the two elements of yin and yang constitute the great principles of the universe. Take day and night. Their endless succession is a case of the two elements of yin and yang at work. What proceeds from them in all directions and in all manners is the material force that moves and flows, by which the multiplicity of things and human beings is produced. I have always compared this process with that of grinding flour. It comes out on all sides, layer after layer. This is just like the material force of the universe, operating continuously without end, producing human beings and things, stage after stage. The material force may be coarse or refined, and therefore men and things may be balanced or unbalanced, refined or coarse. Heaven forms the substance of all things, and nothing can be without it. It is like humanity, which forms the substance of all human affairs and is present everywhere. Of the 300 rules of ceremonies and the 3,000 rules of conduct, none is without humanity. Great heaven clearly sees you wherever you may go. Great heaven clearly sees you wherever you may leisurely walk. Book of Odes. There is nothing of which the principle of nature does not form the substance. This is to say that the way of heaven is everywhere, thus making clear the idea that heaven forms the substance of all things. The negative and positive spiritual forces are the spontaneous activity of the two material forces. I'll read the subnote. The term liangneng, spontaneous activity, comes from the Book of Mencius, where it is better rendered innate ability. Basically, it means natural ability. It is good because human nature, according to Mencius, is originally good. The spontaneous activity of yin and yang is also good, since it follows the principle of nature, which is good. This is one of the most famous Neo-Confucian sayings. It rejects the traditional meaning of Kuei Shen as spiritual beings and gives them the naturalistic and rationalistic meaning of spiritual forces. The negative and positive spiritual forces are the spontaneous activity of the two material forces. This means that the spiritual forces are results of the natural operation or principle. The two material forces are yin and yang. Spontaneous activity means that expansion and contraction and coming and going are all natural operations of principle. Coming and going and contraction and expansion are all natural according to principle, without any manipulation or deliberate arrangement. Hence, they are called spontaneous activities. The two material forces can naturally come and go and contract and expand. Chengyi's saying that the positive and negative spiritual forces are traces of creation is not as good as Chang Sai's saying that the positive and negative spiritual forces are a spontaneous activity. Master Cheng's theory is good, but the two forces seem to be merged one with the other. Master Chang's theory is clear. Yin and yang are clearly present. When a thing first comes into existence, material force comes gradually into it to enrich its vitality. As it reaches its maturity, material force gradually reverts to where it came from, wanders off, and disperses. Its coming means positive spiritual force, Shen, because it is expanding, Shen. Its reversion means negative spiritual force, Kuei, because it is returning, Kuei. One's nature is the one source of all things and is not one's own private possession. It is only the great man who is able to know and practice its principle to the utmost. Therefore, when he establishes himself, he will help others establish themselves. He will share his knowledge with all. He will love universally. When he achieves something, he wants others to achieve the same. As for those who are so obstructed themselves as not to follow this principle of mine, nothing can be done. Obstruction means that one thinks only of himself. Because there is unity, there is the wonderful functioning of the spirit. For example, the four limbs of the human body are one thing. Therefore, when any part is touched, the whole body is conscious of it. It does not need to wait for the mind to go to the other parts before they are conscious of the contact. This is what is meant by the saying, when acted on, it immediately penetrates all things. It reaches without going and goes rapidly without hurrying. Chang Sai has stated the matter very well. We must read carefully, but what is cited here is not the same as in the original. When we compiled this anthology, Lu Po Kung did not agree to cite all Chang's words, and therefore subsequently I did not include them to the sentence, because there is unity, there is the wonderful functioning of the spirit. Chang Sai himself added a note which says, because there are two, spirit is unfathomable. There is only this one thing, but it operates through all things. What we called yin and yang, contraction and expansion, coming and going up and coming down, and what operates in the thousands and tens of thousands of things are none other than this one thing. Therefore he said that as the two are present, spirit is unfathomable. To the sentence, because they are two, there is transformation. He attached a note which says, they extend the one into operation. In regard to everything in the universe, with unity alone transformation is impossible. Only if there are two can there be transformation. For example, only with yin and yang can there be the creation and transformation of the myriad things. Although the two are different entities, essentially their function is to extend the operation of the one. The one means one principle, but it functions in two different ways. Take yin and yang, for example. Within yin there is yang, and within yang there is yin. When yang reaches its limit, yin is engendered, and when yin reaches its limit, yang is engendered. This is why the wonderful transformation is infinite. Unity means purity, and spirit means wonderful functioning, penetrating everything. The mind of the sage is single and pure and penetrates everything whenever it is acted on. The material forces of yin and yang are fundamentally one. They are distinguished as the two substances of yin and yang, but one embraces two. Therefore, there is the unfathomable spiritual mystery. The mind commands man's nature and feelings. The nature is substance, while feelings are function. Both come from the mind, and therefore the mind can command them. To command them is like commanding troops, that is, being their master. Before the mind is aroused, it is the nature. After it is aroused, it becomes feelings. Is this correct? Chushi answered, this is the idea. Everything has its nature. As there is the material force, there must be the principle. Men in all things share this principle. Because it may be free, open, or completely blocked, there is a difference between man and things. The obstruction may be slight or heavy. Hence, there is a distinction between the intelligent and the stupid. The completely blocked is firm and cannot be opened. Heavy obstruction can be removed, but only with difficulty. Slight obstruction can be removed easily. One whose obstruction can be removed easily can penetrate the way of heaven and become one with the sage.